Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Sebastian Munden. I'm the chair of the Global Environmental Action NGO RAP, and we're going to talk a little bit about the topic of building a sustainable food future and resilient supply chains. Just a quick word about RAP, where our work makes the product and food systems more resilient, reduces negative impact on nature and climate, and creates higher standards of living. We provide technical expertise and impartial evidence base and independent convening power. And we achieve impact by bringing together governments, business, and NGOs. And for 25 years, our programs have made more productive use of resources, saved businesses and households money, and reduced greenhouse gas emissions and help restore nature. This topic is really close to our hearts with our UK Food and Drink Pact, and really the need for food businesses to take material action to increase resilience and reduce their supply chain greenhouse gases, but also to confidently manage the climate risks. And this need really is only continuing to increase. And whether you're allocating investment funds or developing supplier partnerships, both depend on having a sufficiently robust fact base from which to identify and track the right mix of actions. On this panel, we're going to explore the opportunities and challenges shaping the sustainable food systems and supply chains. And our great panelists, who I'll introduce in a minute, are going to share strategies to address resource depletion and resource management across the food system, and tackling the effects of climate change on agricultural productivity and food security. But of course, we'll also consider how regenerative farming practices, innovation, and emerging technologies can support resilience and sustainability, while remaining grounded in broader system-wide solutions. And some of these points that will come up all really follow very closely RAP's latest net zero transition plan for the UK food and drink industry. So we'll be talking about water, agricultural practices, packaging, food loss and waste, and diet. And we'll also explore the focus on improving the data that underpins the transition. Obviously, the data is quite a hot topic for many of the companies. The amount of data they're increasingly being expected to produce, the efforts to standardize it and make the burden of collecting that data less onerous, but at the same time, creating the evidence base for the actions required. At the end, we will have opportunities for questions. So do mull over your questions, and hopefully we'll be able to either get you to shout them out or get a mic to you for those. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel here. So I'm going to maybe sort of go left to right to start with. So Tim, starting with you, if you'd just like to say who you are and what you're doing in a sustainable food kind of, what's your impact or your role in sustainable food system?
Sure, thanks so much. And hi, everybody. It's a privilege to be here on this great panel. I think, so I'm Tim Lambert. I am the regional lead for UK, Ireland and Nordics for a company called Sapiens. Sapiens, we were recently described at the Scope 3 peer group as the most used, most highly rated, least known platform software vendor in the UK market today. So I'm here helping to solve one of those three things. I think our background, our heritage is in critical infrastructure, food and pharmaceutical traceability, track and trace, shifting important products across the globe, a background in supply chain automation and traceability. So we're working already, been here in the UK since 2024, halfway through, and we're already working with 4 of the big 5 supermarkets. We already work with most of the German and European supermarkets, and crucially, the entire of their supply chain. So mapping and digitalizing the entire supply chain down to tier N farm is what we do.
Brilliant, and we'll come back to that topic a bit later on in some more depth. Yeshna.
Hi everyone. My name is Yeshna Mistry and I am Sustainability Manager at Mighton Food Group. Mighton Food Group is one of the UK's largest food manufacturers. We've got about 8,000 colleagues across 18 manufacturing sites. We produce meat, fish, produce, plants and eggs. My role within that is looking at efficiency within the site, so looking at energy, water waste, understanding the sourcing supply chains and how we can mitigate the global risks with that, and then growth of both social impact and commercial impact. That's me in a nutshell.
Brilliant, thank you. Bibi.
I'm absolutely blown away that you're 8,000 people. That's ginormous. So I am BB Rogers-Hunt. I am Head of Sustainability for Quorn Foods. There's quite a lot of you who are overlapping with me from this morning. So just to reiterate, Quorn Foods is based up here in the north of England. Our head office is in Stokesley, and that's where our key manufacturing site is. And then we've got commercial offices here in Leeds. We're a land-light, low-carbon alternative protein, and so we really see ourselves as a key player in the transition to a fairer, sustainable food future, and also being British made, a really key part of our food sovereignty as a country as well, because it helps to lessen our reliance on foreign food as well, things that we can actually grow and make here in this country.
Yeah, great point. In fact, the UK has got one of the lower self-sufficiencies in food in Western Europe, so we could do with a bit of a top-up. So, yeah, more of that in a minute. And Cassie, Cassandra.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Dr. Cassandra Hayward, but please just call me Cassie. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Sheffield Hallam University's Advanced Food Innovation Center. My colleague Ida is also here today, who's one of our wonderful engineers. Our center, AFIC for short, so we don't have to say it over and over again. AFIC, we focus on food system innovation across the food supply chain, but we focus on innovation in products, processes, as well as equipment. So we have a huge range of innovative research projects that range from trying to replace fats in vegan cheese, to utilizing plant-based resources, to the project that my colleague Ida and I are working currently, which looks very specifically at food systems sustainability, which is most relevant to what we're talking about here today. So our current sustainability project is as far as we know, the first time anybody's tried to do research in South Yorkshire looking at sustainability in the food and drink manufacturing industry. So we've quantified energy use, carbon emissions, water use in 12 manufacturing companies in the South Yorkshire region. So as we move on today, hopefully you'll learn a little bit more, and so that's what brings us here.
Brilliant. Okay, so maybe let's start with the first kind of thought. So question for all of you, really, and maybe Yeshna, starting with you. What do you believe are the critical actions to building a sustainable food system today, and why? So what does a sustainable food system look like from your perspective?
Sure, small question to start off with.
Small question, yeah.
What's the whole system? From our perspective, a sustainable food system is an imperative, both environmentally and commercially. And for Mighton Food Group in particular, it's around supporting British farmers. It's a big part of what we do, and helping those farmers to reduce carbon and to restore nature. And there's a few real-world examples of how and why we're doing that. One being data. Sustainability professionals love a bit of data, or love to hate it, rather. So from our understanding, about 95% of our carbon comes from the products we buy. And as I mentioned earlier, we produce quite a lot of products like meat. So you can guess where some of our carbon footprint lies. So to mitigate some of that, we work with a company called Map of Ag, who've helped us to work directly with farmers to baseline the carbon footprint of those farms and to create some actions to lower those emissions on farm, and crucially to also increase productivity. It's a really big part of the success behind that program. And then beyond the measurement side of things, we also have active programs to reduce the carbon of our meat products. So one example that we've done for a little while now is called Elite Beef, where, yeah, I know, it sounds great, right? where we are utilising dairy cattle within the beef supply chain, and with a combination of that and some genetics and feed efficiencies, we've managed to reduce the carbon of that product by 40%, 40, which is massive. Considering how beef is quite a big part of our supply chain and a big part of our carbon emissions, it's a really great success story for us and one we're very, very proud of. And then similarly going forward, we're also looking at feed within the beef supply chain. So for those of you who are already involved in the food supply chain, you'll know that feed is a big part of where lots of emissions come from. So we're working with an Earthshot finalist called Sea Forest, essentially getting seaweed into cattle's feed, which is also, it's... My colleague the other day described it a bit like Gaviscon for cows, where you're trying to reduce them burping, essentially. But from what we've seen, it's already a 50% reduction in the methane behind that. And again, that increase in productivity, which is so essential. Without that, we're not going to get the adoption at scale from farmers. So yeah, those are some things that we're actively working on to make sure that the highest carbon areas in our business are being actively addressed.
Yeah, so you pull out 2 points. I think that the RAP team kind of working on that net zero transition plan would really kind of, I think, put their finger on, which first of all, you've got data, which means you know how much you've improved by. You can then do experiments around differential improvement. And also, I think that putting your finger on methane as the kind of the real hot topic in greenhouse gas, and certainly looking back over the last couple of COP discussions around the sort of food carbon footprint, I think a lot of effort going now into methane reduction. So people who maybe haven't differentiated between different greenhouse gases, this could be a good moment to kind of think about, can you isolate your methane footprint and do something extra about that, because it pays back even quicker than your carbon dioxide. So yeah, great story on the beef. So Bibi, coming to you now, of course, you in some ways you don't have the low-hanging fruit of kind of a beef supply chain to improve on. But what does a sustainable food system look when you're in alternative protein?
Yeah. So if we're looking on a systems perspective, and I'm so glad that Yashna's already started talking about it, you can't ignore the cow in the room when we're talking about sustainable food systems. There has to be some element of dietary shift as well involved in that, away from animal agriculture. We're a room full of sustainability professionals, so I'll not go too deep into it, but we know that animal agriculture has an outsized impact on water pollution, on emissions, on deforestation, and there's some amazing work going on to reduce those impacts, but also there needs to be some element of dietary shift. But we are a room full of sustainability professionals here, and I would be willing to bet that quite a few of you still do eat meat, which is perfectly fine. There's no need to look shifty or worried about it. Lots of people, even though we know those impacts, there's all kinds of reasons that people still do eat meat. That might be taste perception, that might be cultural norms, it might be societal accessibility. So a big project that we've been doing that I think will probably surprise some of you, unless you are really into reading the trade press, which maybe some of you are, is we've been doing some blended and hybrid products. So what we're doing is to help shift that transition faster. So rather than waiting for everybody to just decide to become vegetarian, which would be lovely, but that's just not happening fast enough to help to make those changes in the food system fast enough. Actually, what we're doing is we're offering solutions that are 50-50 blended mycoprotein, corn mince, and meat, real meat. Before you worry, on my behalf, that doesn't come into my supply chain, A, to keep my corn customers happy, to make sure that they know that there's no meat going anywhere near corn itself, and then B, for me, I do not want that in my scope 3 emissions, absolutely no way. So it goes into, we sell it to butchers who then blend it. We've been selling it for 2 years now in the NHS in particular. Again, we've got, like your elite beef, we've got quite a nice project name for ours. Ours is 50-50 mycoprotein and beef, and it's called the Meat Halfway Project. So, same kind of thing, yeah. And
you're allowed to groan, by the way.
I love it. And it's going into just family favourites. It's going into chili con carne, into spag bol, shepherd's pie, those kinds of things for staff, visitors, patients, in a whole load of NHS trusts. And what the NHS gets from that is they get massively reduced scope 3 emissions. I obviously can't bank those myself, but if you're looking at an inventory and project perspective, then they're amazing. Massively reduced scope 3 emissions, improved nutritionals on there, so you've got much less saturated fat, increased fibre, corn has fibre in it, meat doesn't. But then also you've got that consistency of the commercials. You know that you're going, whereas beef, as you definitely know, has been really volatile over the past couple of years as a commodity. Actually, you have a much more surety of supply, surety of pricing, and our customers are loving it. So at the moment, it's really taken traction with the NHS, but then we're looking with retailers, with food service providers who are after the same commercial imperatives, but also those sustainability benefits around it.
Yeah, and it's an easy way to help people change their behaviour, which is, part of the thing that I'm interested in is, how do we engage citizens and consumers to change behaviour? And the 50-50 blending is just such an easy way. A lot of people won't even notice, and if they do, it's a great story. Yeah. And the taste is the same, the dishes are the same, so it's a very interesting strategy. And in many ways, of course, it doesn't require different recipes and different cooking skills if it's at home.
Correct.
So very interesting strategy.
And I really like the way that it actually can build upon things that the other players are doing in the market. So this work that Yashna's doing, she can reduce the emissions, but there will come a floor for those emissions reductions. So then if you actually then blend it, you're getting past that floor to reducing even further.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody's really thinking about flexitarians, aren't they? Because those are the shiftable people. Yeah. There's not much more you can do for veggies and vegans, well, veggies maybe, and for die-hard meat and two veggers. Yeah. So the whole focus really on dietary emissions is around flexitarians and making it easy, which I think is the kind of behavioural science behind it. How do you make it as easy as possible? Really interesting. So, Cassie, then, what's your role then in the kind of grand scheme of things? Tell us a little bit about what you're working on.
I ask my question that every day. What is my role in the grand scheme of things? I think when we think of the food system and what do we need to prioritize, I'm quite certain that at least most people, if not everybody in the room, knows just how many priorities there are to be juggling and how difficult it is to reach one goal without jeopardizing another goal, and how much trade-off there is. And as a research center, we fortunately have the time to delve into all that. We have a little bit more time that, companies that, have the bottom line where they have to be producing constantly, we have a little time for reflection to say, okay, how can we make the best kind of trade-off possible? If I have to pick one, it's definitely decarbonization. I think, as Yashna was saying, as each panelist was saying, carbon emissions are a really major concern in the food system. For us, we look at decarbonization in food and drink manufacturing. So we're in the middle of the supply chain. Unfortunately, the middle of the supply chain, there really isn't that much data available publicly, academically. So it can be really difficult to know what the impact is. And there's pretty good thought around it's probably drastically underestimated, the type of emissions and how many emissions are being produced. And so our project worked with 12 food and drink manufacturing companies in South Yorkshire. We collected their energy, water, carbon emission data. But we wanted to go a step beyond that. We didn't want to just say, okay, here are the problems, good luck. So for each of our companies, we provided the best opportunity for them to reduce their carbon emissions, reduce their energy use, and also linked them to funding locally that they could apply to actually implement some of these changes. And so for us, decarbonization is definitely a major concern, and you can do that mainly through electrification. So in the manufacturing industry, we have lots of equipment that some of it still uses petrol, which is really bad. Some uses natural gas, and we're trying to get those equipments moved over to electricity, but there definitely still is an innovation challenge. Not all equipment can be electrified yet, and that's where innovation comes and plays a role. And then secondly, for decarbonization, we're also looking at fuel switching, so using more renewable energy. And so whether that's more renewable energy through the entire grid, we'd love to see the grid decarbonized as a whole, or if manufacturers themselves are either having power purchasing agreements or producing renewable energy themselves. That's really what we're looking at when we look at decarbonization in this stage.
And closed system energy. So one of the things that is in a way the holy grail for a factory is that it turns its own kind of heat and gas into energy. Do you have examples of that?
We actually have a bad example of that. We had one company that has a combined heat and power system. And so the combined heat and power system, as you said, takes in the heat. It gets reused at different parts of the facility. Unfortunately, it uses a lot of natural gas. And so we found that in this company, they're actually creating more carbon emissions by using this specific type of combined heat and power system than if they were on the electricity grid using different types of technology.
Which is quite heartbreaking, really, isn't it? Because you kind of hope that you could make that closed system work. And I can think of factories where the sort of gas byproducts are actually sufficient to run the heat systems of the factory, and it's just a brilliant sort of circular system, saving a small fortune in energy bills. But maybe this is a project in hand.
I mean, more positive is we have also worked with breweries before that have completely closed system, and for them it works really well because there's so much heat that's generated during the brewing process that it really can be a completely contained system. So I think what we've learned the most from this specific example is that so many of these sustainability solutions need to be contextualized within the business, within the subsector, to really understand the impact of it, which again is just one more challenge for companies that there isn't a tailor-made solution for everyone to adopt all at the same time. Like it's going to mostly have to be like individual company to company level.
And of course that's a real challenge for RAP because it's trying to share best practice, and of course not everything always works everywhere. But in the end, I suppose knowing yourself, knowing your system is really important. And Tim, that's I guess where you come in, helping people really understand the system that they're running. And tell us a bit about how you and the work that you're doing at O-Sapiens kind of fits into the sustainable food system.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was just listening really intently and reflecting on all the stories here. It's brilliant, and it's really telling because the food systems and the food industry is what kind of put us on the map. So we're one of those rare things, a green tech unicorn. We're 6 years old. BlackRock and Goldman's and those guys have all invested in us because the original vision is kind of what you guys are articulating. It's, okay, we can see that the future path is there's going to be a tsunami of regulation and compliance for the right reasons, but it's going to come. And it's going to have an impact on businesses who ultimately want to work on their business rather than be dragged into spending their entire lives on that. So, okay, we'll solve for that. But once you map all of your kind of key master data, you get rid of data fragmentation, which one of the things we do, but that's enough about us, but the bigger picture. Once you solve that, you get all your supplier data down to tier N mapped, and you have a dynamic operating system which, is giving you real-time insights. There's an awful lot of value you can derive from that, right? So we do that, and the food systems, as I say, we kind of reached a bit of a network effect there. So we looked at it through the lens of the supply chain, the value chain, and we were like, well, if we could create something that's really simple, really intuitive for the suppliers to use first, that means that they can have one system that solves a lot of the regulatory burden they're being asked to do, product-related questions, and just generally how they interact with their downstream customers, that's surely going to be a good thing. 16 million suppliers later in 6 years, using our system every day has kind of played out. So I think in answer to your question, as it relates to food, EUDR, the regulation that some of you guys may be aware of, deforestation, supply chain regulation that came before that, they were kind of the things that forced, pretty complex systems into, to be mapped and to be visualized, and that's had a positive impact with many of our customers. So we're somewhere between 70 and 90% market coverage of EUDR. You can imagine we had the EU and the EU Traces guys on the phone to us at the end of last year. But what's that given our customers? It's given them visibility. It's given them business insights that's enabling them to do some pretty cool projects like the stuff you do. But it's all joined up. Why have a separate PCF, carbon program running from another system that does your deforestation and another one that... So ours does the whole lot all the time interoperably, and I think that's the economy of scale that we're giving the markets. And in food in particular, in Germany, network effect achieved because all of the main Schwarzgruppers and Edekers and Railway and Metro and all of their suppliers are working with us, and so it's cascaded out to the UK now.
I think this is really important. I mean, one of the things that I get asked most often is, do governments realise how much of a burden this data stuff is that we're being asked to collect and be aware of, and it's in many ways a sort of cry for help, and it's also a cost. And so I think there's a lot of effort going into now, how to make that burden less burdensome. But at the same time, without the data, you can't make the progress. And this is the real conundrum. And I think what we would say at RAP is, you've got to face into it and not kind of hide from it. But there are solutions, and there are ways in which you can do this.
One thing I must say is we wanted to remove the friction completely from the market by making that system that we talked about for the value chain completely free. So there's no cost to suppliers. So not only is it work and it's intuitive, they actually ask their downstream customers, would you consider looking at Osapiens? Because we find it really easy to use. That's been great for us. But then we have all of that data aggregated now, the insights that we can see on how markets are moving, and they're able to kind of share that in an anonymized way with markets to kind of help some of our big customers as well. So it's a nice circularity there.
Yeah, and competition law compliance and all of that. And,
yeah.
And I think when the team did the UK net zero plan with EY and the IGD, I mean, one of the things that was really interesting was where is the data easy to get hold of and where is it not so easy to get hold of, and there's quite a lot of tap dancing around that even now. So Tim, thank you for that. So then moving on to supply chain resilience. So if you like, thinking less about the impact that all these businesses in the food and drink industry are having on climate change, and more about the impact that climate change is having on the food and drink industry. Equally important and in some ways very pressing. And so let's start again with our kind of vertically integrated supply chains. Yes, no. So thinking then about your supply chain, can you draw attention to the places where you're trying to build resilience and how you're doing that?
So earlier last week, the National Farmers Union conference, the president mentioned that resilience isn't optional, and I think resilience was a topic of your talk earlier as well. So very hot topic at the moment that, within the climate space, we need to be thinking about future-facing things, because already we're seeing the impact of climate change and how that is directly impacting food production. So for us, I've already spoken a bit about the meat supply chain, but thinking more about some of the produce we work with, a lot of the produce that we get, fruit and veg, comes from abroad. So what we're trying to do is to map the associated risk with that. So thinking about water in particular, I'm very into water at the moment. We're trying to anticipate the risk. So rather than just waiting for the climate to change, using tools such as the WWF water risk filter to see what's the risk right now, what will the risk look like going forward, and how does that directly impact what we want to be sourcing now and in the future. So for us to have a business and to continue to sell clementines, for example, or blueberries, these are grown in regions where water is a risk and potentially a more challenging one as we go forward. So in order to continue to grow and sell those products, we need to be managing them. So it's a business imperative, which is quite a handy thing when I'm talking to my senior members of staff that fix it or we don't have jobs and we don't have food.
Yeah, and I think this is such an important point. RAP, they're working with, some of the big water catchment areas, not just in the UK, but also in Spain, where you're talking about sort of a lot more water when you don't want it in the winter and not enough when you do in the summer. That's exactly the kind of situation that this project you're describing is also kind of trying to deal with, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. So we use both things like the water risk filter, but then also we have an outsourced team based in 8 different regions across the world. So we have the data and the on-the-ground support. So we can say to people, they have those really great relationships, again, with those farmers on the ground. So what's actually happening? What's the qualitative behind the quantitative? Let's get those two confused. So we have a holistic view of what's going on. And yeah, I guess to the widest point, water security is food security. We can't grow food without water. So another project we're looking at with the Sustainable School of Food and Farming, based a bit closer to home, is to synthesize some of the academic and policy thinking in this area and then to create a decision support tool, that's the right phrase, to help farmers to assess the water risk, but then also to adopt best practice. So essentially a very practical tool to say, what's the risk, what can you do about it, and then how can we scale that out going forward? So we're trialling that with a handful of farms at the moment, and then all being well, we can scale that much, much further on, and that should also align to RAP's Water Pact and the Food and Drink Pact too.
And it is amazing sometimes how simple it is as collecting winter water and then not having to buy grid water in the summer. I mean, it just sounds, I know it's much harder to do, but actually that's a very simple idea that can be executed in many, many different ways depending on the produce and the crops in hand. Very good, thank you. So Bibi, sort of resilience in the protein supply chain. At first blush, you'd say, well, you must have an easy time. What have you got to be resilient about?
I guess I first would have to take a little bit of a step back and describe actually what corn is, because I think probably there's a bit of confusion about what it actually is. So corn is actually a mycoprotein produced through biomass fermentation. So mycoprotein means it's from fungus. Cassie knows all of this in her sleep, standing on her head. But and biomass fermentation means that it's made, the actual thing that you are eating is that mushroom, is the fungus. It's, as some of you may be fungus geeks in here, but you know that mushrooms have sort of a mycelial network that joins them in the forests, and essentially what corn is those mycelial fibres without the fruiting body. And if you ever sort of broken a chicken nugget, a corn nugget, you can sort of see those fibres, and that's you'll recognise it now you think about it. And what we do is we have 40-metre tall fermenters, and we take this tiny fusarium, which is our fungus, and feed it with starch, water, vitamins and minerals, keep it at the right temperature, and it eventually creates protein. After about 12 hours it starts producing 50 tonnes of protein a day. But that starch needs to come from somewhere, and that starch comes from wheat. And wheat has been it's been bred to be very, very resilient in the climate that we've had up until this point. But as you already alluded to it, we're getting more and more wetter. Water's not coming when it's supposed to. You get dry periods, you get very wet periods. Wheat is very top heavy. And so if you have extreme weather events, it just can flatten a whole crop just like that. And then that's gone for the entire year. It's very hard to sow it in certain conditions. So wheat is my problem child at the moment. And so what we're doing is we're exploring alternative feedstocks. And particularly alternative feedstocks. Again, I can feel Cassie nodding next to me. Of these alternative feedstocks, particularly byproduct feedstocks. So lignocellulose is really abundantly found in rice, and it's a byproduct of both the rice production process and the paper production process. They just essentially it's actually a problem for those industries, because it's so high in nutrients that you can't put it back into the water systems, because you'll cause eutrophication and all of those problems. So what we've done is we've got lab-based tests that can prove that you actually can produce mycoprotein from those byproducts of other industries. And then the next plan is to work out, how do we scale that? How do you get those things in the right place? Obviously, transporting water is very difficult, so then you start to work out, do we put it at those places where that produce is where those byproducts are being made, rather than shipping something in with the greenhouse gas emissions problems that would cause. My sort of long-term vision is to imagine if you actually had small-scale biomass fermentation actually in the areas, say rice paddies, where you have this excess of lignocellulose-rich water that's then you've got communities there who are eating too much starch, not enough protein, and so what you're actually doing is producing healthy protein right there in those communities for the people who need it. That's a dream, but there's some steps that we can get to along the way on as well.
And presumably that would also improve the whole kind of environmental profile of rice as well, which of all the grains is one of the most problematic due to the the flooding effectively that needs to take place in order to grow it. So that's got intriguing kind of systemic benefits as well, potentially. But it's very striking when you describe how corn is made, that it to me it just sort of triggers, well, isn't that exactly what the cultivated meat industry has sort of copied? And that is the, if you like, the biomodel of meat cultivation that you've described.
I find it quite funny because corn's been producing and selling for 40 years.
Yeah.
If we started producing and selling now, people would think we were so novel, so incredible.
Yeah.
But lots of us grew up with it. We're all so used to it now that we sort of don't see it. We'd be the startups on the stage. Isn't this amazing? But we were there first.
Yes, and no ancient forests were destroyed chasing mycelia across the forest.
Yes.
So that also is quite important to say at this point.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating, and of course the consequences of the sort of monocultures in these major grains is a sort of accident waiting to happen, and obviously the bread industry is very attuned to that as well. Well, maybe that's a good time to talk about R&D and technology perspectives. Cassie, tell us about resilience and how R&D can help with resilience.
Yeah, that's our whole thing, really, isn't it? First, we love to see science at work. This is great. She's right. I am nodding my head. I'm like, yeah, this is cool. But yeah, we look at different areas of the supply chain. But I think, again, if we take a step back, resilience isn't just about climate change. It's about a lot of different challenges that the food system is facing and will continue to face. When we think of geopolitical conditions and how rapidly they've varied over the last especially the last 5 years. When we think about animal disease and risk, when we think about, again, monocropping, potentially a disaster waiting to happen. So there's resilience needed in quite a few areas. Climate change is probably the one that we're most concerned about and probably the most biggest challenge. But innovation goes hand in hand pretty well the whole way through, because innovation, and I know it can be a bit scary, especially for SMEs, but I'm going to steal a line from one of the previous panels where they said, innovation is evolution, not revolution. Sometimes I think when people hear innovation, they think it has to be like, oh, this is a world-changing, absolutely brand new idea. But oftentimes, innovation is just one incremental step forward at a time. And so I think that if we view our supply chains like that, especially food systems, there are so many options already available and already working. And the main role of innovation is adaptability, right? If you have a problem, you need it solved, you innovate a new idea. Or even better, the new idea is already out there and you learn how to apply it to your own business or to your own supply chain. So we look at quite a lot of different things. We've looked at AI and how it can be used in the supply chain. We're looking at blockchain, looking at decarbonization, but also even something like the electrification of fleets is something to consider as we transition away from fossil fuels.
And even recipe flex, is at a very simple level. A very easy way to build supply chain resilience, alternative supply systems, as simple as a change to recipe, and so I think your point about incrementalism is well made. Bibi, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, this is something that we've integrated into actually our stage gate processes, where they design a recipe actually with the carbon footprint in mind before you've ever done anything else. Well, it's still an idea. You actually integrate it in before you mustn't think about it at the end of something. It needs to be actually integrated, baked into how you do things.
Yeah. So what ifing your carbon footprint
Yeah.
at the stage gate on design lock, not having a kind of moment right at the end. Yeah. No, extremely important. But also, I think it's very practical advice to give to business, which is, think about the single points of failure in your supply chain and have alternative recipes to that. It's just a very entry point approach to resilience. Yeah, do you want to follow up on that?
Training our new product development teams in the principles of regenerative agriculture. We have no idea where it's going to go. We just thought they should know it. And they said, well, why are you teaching me this? And what do you want me to do with it? And I said, I don't know. I'm going to teach you about it. So we taught them about nitrogen fixing crops that are used as cover crops that go to waste. And already there's starting to be some, could we do a fava falafel, something that's grown here in the UK that's going to waste at the moment, and people starting to think. So it's not necessarily actually giving people all the answers, but giving people the agency to change that and to actually have that impact on the food system with new product development, bringing things to consumers and creating new markets for things that we are wasting already in the food system as it stands at the moment.
Yeah, and once you see that, you can't unsee it. So I think training people to see the reuse of so-called waste products. I mean, that's a training for life. Once you think like that and see it, you take that everywhere you go, Cassie.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add, and I think probably another cow in the room is money. A lot of this innovation, R&D, it can be very profitable for businesses. In our research, we have provided every single one of our companies an opportunity to innovate or transition, and nearly all of them have profit savings within the first 5 years. And so it can be hard to get companies, especially SMEs, and especially in the food industry, because as probably, again, everybody knows, food industry, we're dealing with pretty small profit margins, very small profit margins. So it can be that extra hurdle to convince food businesses anywhere in the supply chain to invest in R&D, because they don't have that much to work with a lot of the time, especially the mom and pop type of shops.
Yeah. And waste elimination is always a good kind of track to look down to find both savings as well as changing the carbon footprint, and they all sort of come together at a certain point. And when I was at Unilever, we accidentally saved quite a lot of money trying to chase carbon out of our supply chain, because effectively it's standing there as a beacon for wastefulness. Yeshna, do you want to add something to that?
I was actually thinking of something I did a couple of jobs ago. So I've worked at sustainability for the last 12 years, and I used to work for a workplace contract caterer. And what we were just talking about there reminded me of a competition we ran with some of the chefs, where we were looking at the largest portions of waste across the business. And because we did breakfast service, we had a lot of porridge. So one of the things that actually moved forward when we looked at all the different waste streams and what could be done with it, and giving creative people who work in kitchens all the time, so here's a product, go do something cool with it. And the winners of the competition were twofold. There was one around the porridge waste, where they effectively made, I can't remember what we called them, but kind of porridge and nut butter, little kind of protein balls, I think they were referred to, and then managed to sell them. So as a result of having a waste product, understanding it was quite a heavy waste product when it showed up in my waste stats, and then being able to not only utilise it but make money from it. Everyone in commercial loves a bit of cash.
Yeah.
Did really well, and similarly with some of the juice pulp waste, managed to integrate that into some of the meat burgers, and then create kind of a more nutrient dense burger, which was really cool. Not a Myton story, but.
No, at RAP we work with food service across the world, and these kitchen technologies like Winnow for kind of kitchen management. I mean, once you can create some kind of change of culture, and it doesn't become a sort of the chef says, if you make me do this, I'm going to leave. You get past the kind of cultural problems. You actually it unleashes a whole new creativity in a professional kitchen. Tim, just thinking then about technology perspectives and the role of technology in supply chain resilience. What are you seeing?
Again, I think it comes back to.
Get your mic.
I probably don't need it. It comes back to. Thank you. It comes back to, I guess, and fascinating anecdotes, guys. Really, really interesting. I'm definitely learning a lot. I won't be able to remember the the components of corn. I'll try, and mycoprotein is what I remember. But being able to predict ahead. So I think a lot of our big customers are now using the agentic AI within our portal in order to predict climatic impacts, deforestation, yes, water shortage, and human rights and some other of those elements in the supply chain which you can fall foul of very easily. However, I think also now being able to dynamically offer optionality of supply chain to customers, make suggestions based on the risk that they're seeing, so there's ready-made alternatives within the supply chain, that means they don't get the disruption, which they all want to avoid, of course, is another interesting developing area, I think. Certainly something we're seeing, but I think you referenced it really well on the geopolitical situation. On I go to a lot of things on Scope 3. I go to a lot of things on decarbonisation, and it's being rebadged now as we're doing projects that reduce risk, friction, cost, and I think a lot of it comes to that. If you can demonstrate that your data is showing that you've embedded sustainability into your procurement and sourcing processes and things like that, that's an area that I think we see and we help with. And one example, if I may, sorry, you go first.
I was just going to say that I think after when we saw the just-in-time supply chains collapse around COVID and Brexit, I think everyone started saying, "Oh, you've got to build redundancy into your supply chain." Well, this is very bad marketing. I mean, redundancy just sounds bad, doesn't it? But what you said, I think, is much more powerful, which is you have to build optionality into your supply chain, and that's not the same as redundancy, because optionality can lie in wait. It can be relatively low cost. Whereas redundancy sounds like you're just kind of moronically taking on a whole load of extra cost just in case. And I think this idea of cute flexibility, cute optionality is a much more powerful expression of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of this time, last orders, and I think a lot of, I lost my train of thought then, it was the gong. It's probably metaphorical, but yeah. So I think that's important.
Very good. Well, look, you'll get a chance.
You'll
get a chance to say it in a minute, because we're going to throw it open. I think Rob's got a mic, so if anyone would like to ask a question, give us a wave. And
it was actually an intent. That was a purposeful gong, was it? As opposed.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. I think you read more into it. Yeah. Who's got a question? Give us a wave. Okay, we could do this the hard way. We can do the Bob.
Yeah. So I've got just a quick one actually for corn, and it made me think actually that there's a lot of vegetarians and vegans who don't like the new Magic Mountains sort of strange fake meat type things, partly because it feels alien and Frankenstein and all that, and partly because it feels just utterly UPF, right? And so why copy meat if you don't want meat? Let's go back to eating good quality vegetables and chopping them up and putting them in a lasagna or whatever. But you're neither just going back to basic eating of veg, but neither are you one of the nasty Frankensteins. So you're almost in the perfect zone for growth, aren't you? In a way, is there a way of not being a Frankenstein and being something that is 40 years old and proud of it?
Yeah, I do like to think we are kind of in a sweet spot in that market. We've just launched recently a no artificials range, and that's the bulk of everything that we do now. So that's all our mince pieces. I think mince has 3 ingredients, pieces has 4 ingredients. It's really, really low label, low number of ingredients, and we're high in protein, low in saturated fats. And so I think one of the things that even with those sort of Franken meaty ones, which I don't particularly eat myself, but there's potentially a place for them in dietary shift, is you've always got to think about what are they eliminating, what are they replacing, and they're often replacing processed meat itself, which is something that is associated with a whole load of negative health outcomes, be that bowel cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. So actually, while they you'd much rather eat a strawberry than a strawberry Pop-Tart. That is definitely much more healthy to eat a strawberry than a strawberry Pop-Tart. Actually, to eat alternative protein versus processed meat, we know that that's a healthier option, even if there's some degree of processing to it sometimes. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, there's a gent down here in the middle. Robbie, do you vault the seats? How do you do this?
Not quite.
Oh, you get a cooperation.
Okay, so one of the things that I'm working on is a very large project to reconnect water cycles in East and Southern African nations. The end of that will mean that there is less flooding, less drought, more even climate, and we will turn a lot of barren land into food crop land over a period of 30 months on a rolling basis. This will mean that in the next 5 or 10 years, while Europe and the UK are becoming less food secure, then those nations will be coming out of food insecurity and into food security, and not only will be able to feed their nations, but can be a provider to Europe and the UK for the essential food it needs. And so I wanted to carry on that point and ask, you were talking about the ingredients for Quorn, and I mean, could you use products, grown in those nations? Because they will have a surplus.
100%, maybe not in Quorn because we focus on this, but potentially depending on what those feedstocks could be, especially if there were byproducts from those. But we also have the brand Cauldron, where we do our falafels, our tofu, things like that. I'd love to see something like a tofu made from something that has social value attached to it as well, and not just it as a commodity, but something that's actually helping people in those nations, in those communities to thrive. It'd be fantastic to see.
Okay.
Great, thank you very much. Very interesting and great work that's going on there. There was somebody waving in the middle, yes, just in the shadows there. Well, you probably don't know you're in the shadows, but from where we are.
Thank you, Tom. Hello, my name's Tom. I work in media, so this is all fascinating and quite new to me. So I guess, look, as the layman, right, how close are you to the marketing team? Because what you guys are actually saying about the impact of red meat, the supply chain, what could potentially happen if we're not resilient, why isn't this talked about more to the everyman, me as a consumer? How do I get this message, and what would you say to the consumer that they should do tomorrow or think about when they're purchasing?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Tom. Yeshna, do you want to have a go at that? Oh, BB first. Okay.
We actually got a new CEO about a year ago who asked the exact same question. He's from a marketing background, and he was like, "You're doing all of this fantastic stuff. Why am I not hearing about it?" So we really are actually working out ways to bring that commercial value. So my next 3 months, I'm setting up a net positive academy with my commercial teams to actually work out how do we sell this story. How do you actually, you're doing this amazing stuff already, how do you actually teach the retailers that this is adding value to their supply chain? What benefits are we bringing to them? We're looking for external accreditations, potentially B Corp, for actually things to make us much more credible and robust in the things that we're saying, and then also connecting with our customers to help them understand what the societal role is. So it's actually going to become part, I like that you've spotted it already, it's actually going to become core part of our marketing for the next few cycles, and it's going to become part of our brand identity as positive protein, and something that you'll continue to see over the next few years.
Oh, very good. Cassie, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, I think from our end, academics aren't well known for going out and shouting from the rooftops the work that we do, which is a major flaw, right? Like, when you think of academics, you're probably thinking sat at a desk in a dark room, bright computers, and you're not wrong. Like, that's
sometimes you're in a lab.
So yeah, we do. Yeah, we work in the lab, and so I think part of what our AFIX goal is to try to bridge that gap, because we do a lot of applied research. We publish in lots of papers the really complicated stuff that maybe your layman wouldn't, or layperson maybe wouldn't understand, but also trying to translate that in a way that your average everyday person could, because my personal belief is, what's the point of doing all this really scientific academic research if we can't use it, if the people can't use it? And part of what we do at the center is we work a lot with young people and children in schools to let them know that there are career options in like food and drink, but also research and development, innovation, and they can kind of get access to jobs in a way that they might not necessarily think of. Like I'm actually a social scientist, but I work with engineers and computer scientists and plant scientists, and so we get to talk to kids and say, if you're not the math science kid, that was not me, you could still be in this space. There's a place for you here. So I think that's part of our role of what we've been trying to do.
Yes, and it's always amazed me, having been to a fair few of these parliamentary receptions, how industry is much smaller than food and drink, aerospace, which, is a fraction of the size, get a lot of political attention, and food and drink a lot less. So I know one of the things that, the Industry Association, Food and Drink Federation and people like that are trying to do is really kind of impress upon government. I think their factoid is food and drink industry is the only industry in every single constituency in the UK, and things like this to try and help kind of tell that story. The other thing I would say is that most governments are terrified on the topic of diet. I don't think there's a government in the Western world, with the possible exception of Denmark, who's actually tackled the topic of diet with citizens. And I think that the received wisdom in political circles is it's certain death. Which is really problematic when you think about some of the things that we're talking about. How to eat meat better, how to eat better meat, how to eat meat alternatives. This is a conversation that you need an adult-to-adult conversation with government about between government and citizens about this, and that's that's not going to be easy. Yeshna.
If I can just come in on your question, Tom. There's a couple of answers to that for me. One is around when you're marketing sustainability. One thing that we've noticed I've noticed in this current job, it's about what messaging appeals most to your particular consumer. So I talked a little bit earlier around supporting British farmers. The reason I've said that is because I know that for our biggest customer, that's what their customers care about. So for the end consumer, supporting British particularly is a thing that they care about. So therefore, when I'm looking at how am I going to adapt my sustainability messaging that they'll buy, that's what it's aligning to. So yeah, tying in sustainability into what's actually important to your customers rather than something that might be less important to them. So that's the on-the-nose stuff, but also working actively to make sure that the rest of the products that we're making are sustainable by default. So that's a big ambition of mine, is to kind of normalise sustainability within everything we do, so you don't have to necessarily shout about all of it because everything just gets great. Now I'm aware that we're a little way off that becoming the normality for every single product that we do and every single product within the marketplace. But one of the things that I've seen a lot within customer insight is customers expect brands to do it anyway, rather than necessarily shout about it.
Yeah. And the truth is, when you look at the progress of the food and drink industry against the net zero plan, we've managed sort of 14% reduction. That's another 36% to go by 2030. So we're quite obviously behind. So whilst we have many of these excellent examples, the fact is there are not enough of them, and it's not going fast enough. And solving some of these problems on data, both the cost and the burden, and is going to be really important. Sharing some of these brilliant ways that you can increase productivity, yield, margin, and do the right thing are going to be massively important. Just one soundbite each. What are you cheerful about? What are you optimistic about? That's kind of that as we leave this topic for today, what's the one thing that gives you hope? Maybe starting with you, Cassie. Yeah.
Yeah, I could say I'm fairly young, so I feel like I am still full of optimism, even after a PhD. It hasn't beaten me down yet. But I would say that in my job at AFIC, it's collaborations and letting the private sector know you don't have to do this alone. We are not a profit-generating organization. We're part of the university, and we partner with companies, lots of companies in the food and drink industry, to try to help them optimize their business, transition to renewable resources, look into innovative technologies. And so there are programs out there that can help support your business. Like, for example, at AFIC, we are running a program where we're inviting food and drink companies to come to us to apply with an innovative idea, and we can cover up to 70% of the cost.
Whoa.
Yeah, but only up to £10,000. We don't got that kind of money.
Okay, that was nearly amazing, but still very good.
Yeah, £10,000 limit.
Bibi, what are you feeling optimistic about? What's giving you the motivation?
So I didn't prepare for this today. I thought I'll wait and see how today goes and see how cheerful I feel by the end of it. And I feel really cheerful for the brains that I have met today. So whether that's eco-poetry or bright minds who are thinking about difficult problems in their own communities, whether that's people who are working in consultancy firms who are making things better, who are working through 8,000 different people. The amount of brain energy that is in this space today is astonishing and phenomenal, and if we're all putting our minds to the same similar problems, then of course there's something that can be done about that. I think when you look outside, things can feel quite hopeless, but actually look to each other, because this is how things will get sorted.
And people get a lot of energy from an event like this, seeing people doing similar things, so that also helps. Yeshna, what's your soundbite?
Slightly outside of the room, and I mentioned this to you earlier, Seb, there's this Nobel laureate who was in the news last week for creating an off-grid machine that can effectively take clean water out of the air. So even if the air's up to 20% humidity, creating up to, I think, 1,000 litres of clean water just from thin air, which is madness to me. But essentially, if we're looking at areas that might be hit by a hurricane, you could bring in this machine, dump it down, and then you'd have clean drinking water for people who really needed it. And I think hearing stories like that, I think maybe we'll be all right. Maybe we'll be fine.
Great story.
That's giving me a lot of hope.
Tim.
Yeah, all of those examples are phenomenal, and I think you can encapsulate that in the speed with which there's technological advancements and adoption, and the more that retailers and suppliers are there using these technologies, they're seeing the benefits as well. There's a lot of good stuff out there, and I think, interestingly, I was speaking to some customers, and they were saying that compliance in areas like being forced to do some stuff around deforestation, for example, has had a big positive impact on the rest of their business in terms of, the product compliance, the product carbon footprint stuff, and then just getting better business insights into how they're doing business today is improving materially. So a lot of positivity there.
Great, thank you. And if you're feeling lonely, please don't be lonely. Come and join the UK Food and Drink Pact. You'll find us on rap.ngo. Thank you for listening. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.